It all started with the fog, which I know sounds cliché for Eureka, but this wasn't just any fog. I've lived in Humboldt County for years now, seen my share of marine layers so thick you could chew on them. This was different. It rolled in over Humboldt Bay like a living thing, not just a weather pattern. It was denser, quieter, and it just hung around. Not dissipating by noon, not lifting for a weak sunbeam. It settled in and stayed, a permanent, suffocating blanket.
I remember the first week of it, sometime mid-October. The air got colder, even indoors. My apartment, a small place off Harrison Avenue with a decent view of the bay on a clear day, felt like a refrigerator. Chloe, who I worked with at the local community college, we were both adjuncts in the English department, had mentioned it too. We'd grab coffee before our morning classes, usually at Old Town Coffee with chocolates, and she'd shiver, pulling her cardigan tighter.
It's like the world just decided to put a filter on, she'd said one morning, her breath puffing out in a white cloud. She was wearing these faded blue jeans that day, the kind that fit just right, tracing the curve of her hips, and a loose-fitting cream sweater. Her dark hair, usually tied back in a messy bun, was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, framing a face that always seemed to catch the light just so. Her cheekbones, even in the dim light of the cafe, looked sculpted, almost perfect. I remember thinking how the cold made her lips a little chapped, but they still looked so full, so inviting. I caught myself staring for a second too long, my eyes lingering on the way the sweater stretched slightly across her chest as she leaned forward to take a sip of her latte. I quickly looked away, feeling a prickle of heat rise in my neck, hoping she hadn't noticed. "Yeah, feels like we're living in a black and white movie," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant, but my mind was still replaying the image of her lips, the way they'd parted just slightly around the rim of the cup. It was a constant battle, trying to keep my focus on the conversation, on anything but the way her presence affected me. She had this way of moving, a natural grace that made even the simplest gestures captivating. When she'd shifted in her seat, I'd noticed the gentle sway of her hips, the denim pulling taut across her thighs, and I had to actively force myself to concentrate on the steam rising from my own coffee. It felt inappropriate, these thoughts, especially when we were just friends, just colleagues. But they were persistent, like a hum under the surface. The fog got worse. It muted everything. Sounds were swallowed, colors leached away. The vibrant reds of the Victorian houses in Old Town looked like faded photographs. Driving became a nightmare, visibility dropping to mere feet. People started staying home more. Classes at the college dwindled, then were moved online, then eventually suspended altogether. It felt like the town was holding its breath. That's when I first saw him. It was during one of my increasingly infrequent trips to the grocery store, Safeway on F Street. The fog was so thick inside the store, or at least it felt like it. The fluorescent light seemed to struggle against it, casting a yellowish, sickly glow. I was in the produce section, trying to find decent avocados, when I looked up and saw him. He was standing by the display of organic kale, just staring, not at the kale, not at me, but sort of through me. He was a tall man, maybe in his late 50s or early 60s, dressed in an old, ill-fitting tweed jacket and dark trousers. His hair was sparse, a few wisps of gray clinging to his scalp, and his face was gaunt, almost skeletal. But it was his eyes that got me. They were a pale, watery blue, and they held an intensity that was unnerving. They didn't blink. He just stood there, perfectly still, watching. I tried to ignore him, pretended to be very interested in the ripeness of a bell pepper. When I looked up again, he was gone. Just vanished. I told myself it was the fog, the poor lighting, my imagination. But a chill had settled in my bones, colder than the refrigerated produce. A few days later, I was walking down a nearly deserted sidewalk in Old Town, trying to get some exercise, the fog clinging to my clothes like damp cobwebs. The scent of saltwater and damp redwood was heavy in the air, but it felt stale somehow. The old Victorian buildings, usually so charming, now looked like ghostly sentinels, their ornate details lost in the haze. I heard footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. I glanced over my shoulder, but the fog was too thick. I picked up my pace slightly. The footsteps matched mine. My heart started to pound. I told myself it was just someone else out for a walk, but the silence was too profound. No other sounds, no distant traffic, no gulls crying, just those rhythmic steps, and the blood thrumming in my ears. I turned a corner onto 2nd Street, planning to duck into a doorway, and there he was, standing directly in front of me, maybe 20 feet away, emerging from the swirling mist. The same man, the tweed jacket, the gaunt face, those unsettling blue eyes. That he wasn't walking towards me, he was just there. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. That I felt a cold dread crawl up my spine. That my mouth went dry. That I tried to speak, but no words came out. That I just stared back, paralyzed. Then very slowly, a faint smile spread across his face. That it wasn't a friendly smile. That it was thin, stretched, and utterly devoid of warmth. That it made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I broke eye contact first, turning sharply and practically running down the street, not looking back. That I didn't stop until I was back inside my apartment, slamming the door shut and leaning against it, gasping for breath. My hands were shaking. That I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence, that he was just a local eccentric. But the way he had appeared, the way he had smiled, it felt deliberate. I called Chloe. She picked up on the second ring, her voice a little sleepy. "Hey, what's up?" "Chloe, something weird just happened." I tried to keep my voice steady, but it cracked a little. That I recounted the encounter, the 2 sightings, the unsettling smile. She listened patiently. "That's creepy, Julian. But Eureka has its share of strange folks, you know that." "Yeah, but this felt different, like he knew I was there, waiting for me." There was a pause. "Maybe you're just a little on edge with all this fog. That it's getting to everyone." She was right, of course. The fog was getting to everyone. But it didn't explain the feeling. That I decided not to push it, not to sound completely unhinged. That we talked for a bit longer, about the suspended classes, about how isolating it felt. That I found myself picturing her, curled up on her sofa, maybe in a soft t-shirt, her legs tucked under her. That I could almost feel the texture of her skin, the warmth of her body. The thought was a strange counterpoint to the fear still prickling at me, a brief, unwelcome distraction. That it made me feel a little disgusted with myself, that even in a moment of genuine unease, my mind could still wander to such places. The next few days were a blur of the same oppressive fog. That I barely left my apartment. I cooked simple meals, watched old movies, tried to grade papers that weren't really due anymore. The silence outside was absolute, broken only by the occasional distant foghorn, a mournful sound that seemed to echo from another dimension. Then the dreams started, not nightmares, not exactly, more like unsettling vignettes. That I'd be walking through a version of Eureka, but it was empty, completely devoid of people. The fog would be everywhere, thicker than ever, swirling around the base of the Victorian houses like a tide. And then just at the edge of my vision I'd see him, the man, always watching, always silent. That I'd wake up with a jolt, the cold sweat clinging to my skin, the image of his gaunt face burned into my mind. One morning I was making coffee, my phone resting on the counter. That it buzzed. That it was a text from Chloe. Morning. This fog is really getting to me. Wanna try and brave it for coffee later? Need human contact. My heart gave a little jump. Yeah, absolutely. Where do you want to meet? I texted back, maybe a little too eagerly. My place? It's closer and I've got some good beans. You can pretend you're still grading papers if you want. Her apartment was in a smaller complex closer to the waterfront, a bit further from my usual haunts. That I liked her place. That it was always neat, with a faint scent of vanilla and books. That I felt a surge of anticipation, a mixture of genuine relief at the thought of seeing a friendly face, and that familiar, unwelcome thrum of desire. That I imagined her in her apartment, maybe just out of bed, her hair still a bit tousled, wearing something loose and comfortable. The thought made my palms sweat a little. I got ready, pulling on a thick sweater and a waterproof jacket. The fog outside was a physical wall. That I could barely see the building across the street. The air was heavy, damp, and smelled faintly of brine and something else, something metallic, like old pennies. That I walked carefully, using the faint outlines of parked cars as my guide. When I got to Chloe's building, the door was slightly ajar. That I pushed it open and stepped into the small, carpeted hallway. "Chloe?" I called out. "Come on in, Julian." Door was sticking. Her voice drifted from inside her apartment. That I found her in her kitchen, humming softly to herself as she poured hot water over a French press. She was wearing a pair of dark leggings and a loose, oversized gray sweatshirt. Her dark hair was pulled back in a high ponytail, exposing the delicate curve of her neck. That as she leaned over the counter, The leggings pulled taut across her calves, highlighting the elegant line of her ankles. I found my gaze lingering on the way her top stretched across her back, just enough to hint at the shape underneath. She glanced over her shoulder and smiled, a genuine warm smile that made my chest feel tight. "Hey, you made it. Want some toast?" she asked, gesturing to a plate of sourdough. "Toast sounds amazing," I said, trying to keep my voice even. I walked closer, leaning against the counter, trying to focus on the conversation, on the warmth of the coffee, on anything but the way her movements seemed to effortlessly highlight her body. When she reached for a mug, her arm brushed mine, and a jolt went through me. She didn't seem to notice, but I felt a blush creep up my neck that I hated how obvious I felt, how my body reacted against my will. We talked for a while, mostly about the fog, the strange quiet, the way it was affecting everyone. She confessed she'd been having trouble sleeping, that the constant gray outside her window made her feel disoriented. "It's like the world just stopped," she said, looking out her window, which was just a solid sheet of white. "No cars, no people, just nothing." As she spoke, she ran a hand through her hair, and her sweatshirt shifted, revealing a sliver of skin at her waist. My eyes snagged on it for a moment, the smooth, pale skin, before I forced myself to look away, to listen to her words. That it was a constant battle. This internal monologue of desire clashing with the growing sense of dread. That it felt wrong, almost perverse, to be so aware of her body when the world outside felt like it was dissolving. Suddenly her phone, which was lying on the counter, buzzed. She picked it up, her brow furrowed. "That's weird," she muttered. "What is it?" "It's a picture, from my phone, but I didn't take it." She turned the screen towards me. It was a blurry, grainy image. It looked like a street in Old Town, but everything was distorted by the fog, and in the foreground, barely discernible, was a figure. Tall, gaunt. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. It was him. The man. "Who is that?" Chloe asked, her voice a whisper. I think that's him," I said, my voice barely audible. "The man I told you about." Her eyes widened, fear creeping into them. "But how did this get on my phone? And when would I have taken it?" We checked the metadata. The picture was taken yesterday evening, just a few blocks from her apartment. Neither of us had been out that way. Neither of us had taken a picture like that. We tried to delete it, but the phone glitched. The screen flickered, a burst of static, and then the picture was gone, replaced by her usual lock screen. "Okay, that's not okay," Chloe said, her voice trembling slightly. She wrapped her arms around herself, her fingers digging into her biceps. I noticed the way her breasts pressed against the fabric of her sweatshirt as she did this. A small, involuntary movement of my gaze, even as the cold dread seeped deeper into me. The juxtaposition was jarring, sickening almost. "It's just a glitch, maybe," I tried to reassure her, though I didn't believe it myself. "The fog's messing with everything, signals, whatever. A glitch that puts a picture of a creepy man I've never seen on my phone, taken without me knowing?" She shook her head, her dark hair swaying. "Julian, this is too much. I feel like I'm losing my mind." We spent the rest of the day together, trying to distract ourselves. We played board games, watched a terrible old movie, but the fog outside pressed in, a constant, silent reminder. Every time I looked out the window, it was there, a solid, impenetrable wall of white. The silence was unnerving. No cars, no distant voices, no sounds of daily life. It was as if the town had been emptied. Chloe seemed to cling to my presence, and I to hers. There was a comfort in shared fear, even as my internal struggle persisted. I'd catch her watching me, her eyes wide and a little glassy with anxiety, and my gaze would drop to her lips, or the way her top hugged her, and I'd feel a pang of guilt, a flash of self-loathing. How could I be thinking about that when we were both clearly terrified? But the thoughts were like an itch, persistent and unwelcome. That night, I stayed at her place. Neither of us wanted to be alone. We made up a bed on the sofa for me. Before we turned in, she stood by the window, peering out into the white abyss. Her body was tense, her shoulders hunched. The leggings she wore were like a second skin, and as she shifted her weight, I could see the subtle flex of her calf muscles, the curve of her thighs. I wanted to go to her, to put my arms around her, to offer comfort, but I knew it wouldn't be just comfort, and that held me. "But it's so quiet," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Too quiet." I agreed. The silence was the worst part. That it felt like the world had been muted, like a giant hand had pressed pause on everything. The next morning the fog was still there, if anything thicker. That we tried our phones. No signal. The internet was out. Landlines were dead. That we were completely cut off. Okay, this is officially not normal, Chloe said, her voice tight with panic. We need to get out of here. Drive out. We decided to try that. We packed a small bag with some essentials, water, snacks. That I felt a surge of protectiveness, watching her move around her apartment, her movements quick and efficient despite the fear in her eyes. She wore a thick wool sweater and sturdy boots, her hair pulled back tightly. Even in her fear, even dressed for an escape, her natural beauty was undeniable. The way her jeans hugged her hips as she bent to pick up her bag, the way her hair caught the faint light from the window. My eyes would drift, unwanted, to the curve of her lower back, the delicate line of her jaw. It was a persistent, unsettling undercurrent. Stepping outside was like entering another world. The fog was a solid, oppressive presence that I could barely see my hand in front of my face. The air was heavy, cold, and still carried that metallic, briny scent. We held hands, a desperate attempt to stay connected, to ground ourselves. Her hand was cold, trembling slightly in mine. I squeezed it, trying to convey reassurance. I didn't feel. We walked towards the main road, slowly, carefully. The streets were deserted. No cars, no people, no sound. It was an apocalyptic quiet. The Victorian houses, usually so distinctive, were now just blurry outlines, ghost ships in a white sea. We passed a corner store, its lights off, its windows opaque with condensation. As we walked, I kept scanning the swirling mist, half expecting, half dreading to see him, the man. Every shadow, every shift in the fog made my heart leap. Chloe clung to my arm, her nails digging into my sleeve. I could feel her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. We walked for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. The fog seemed to thicken with every step, pressing in on us, disorienting us. We were trying to get to Highway 101, to head south, to get out. But the road signs were obscured, the landmarks vanished. Then we heard it, footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere ahead, just beyond the veil of white. Chloe gasped, squeezing my arm so hard it hurt. Julian, do you hear that? Yeah, I whispered, my voice barely a thread. Stay close. The footsteps got closer, closer. We stopped, frozen, peering into the swirling mist. My breath hitched in my throat. I could feel the cold sweat trickling down my back. Chloe was pressed against me, her body trembling, her head buried in my shoulder. I could feel the soft weight of her breast against my arm, the frantic beat of her heart against my side. Even in this moment of extreme terror, a part of my mind registered it, the raw, animal closeness of her body, the desperate instinct to protect her, to hold her. It was a strange, primal mix of fear and desire, an uncomfortable jumble of sensations. And then he emerged, slowly, deliberately, from the fog. The man. He was standing maybe 30 feet away, just staring at us. The same tweed jacket, the same gaunt face, the same unervingly pale blue eyes, and that thin, stretched smile. It was wider this time, showing a glimpse of yellow teeth. He didn't move, he didn't speak, he just stood there, watching. Run, I whispered to Chloe, my voice hoarse. Run now. We turned and ran blindly into the fog, not caring where we were going, just away from him. The footsteps didn't follow. Or if they did, the fog swallowed the sound. We ran until our lungs burned, until our legs ached, until we collapsed against what felt like a brick wall, gasping for air. What was that? Chloe choked out, her face pale, streaked with tears. Her hair had come loose, falling around her face in damp tendrils. Her lips were trembling. I wanted to kiss them, to stop the trembling, to offer some kind of solace. The thought flashed through my mind, unbidden, even as my own body shook with fear. We huddled there for a long time, trying to catch our breath, trying to calm our racing hearts. The silence was absolute again, broken only by our ragged breathing. After a while, when the adrenaline had subsided a little, we pushed ourselves up. Where are we? Chloe asked, her voice small. I looked around. We were still surrounded by the impenetrable white. I tried to orient myself. We had been running generally south, I thought, towards the highway, but nothing looked familiar. The brick wall we were leaning against, it didn't feel like any building I knew in Eureka. It was too smooth, too featureless. We started walking again, slower this time, trying to find a recognizable landmark, a street sign, a building, anything. But there was nothing, just the fog, stretching endlessly in every direction. It was like we were walking on a blank canvas. Then I noticed it, the ground beneath our feet. It wasn't asphalt or concrete anymore. It was dirt, damp, packed earth. And the air, that heavy, metallic, briny scent, was now overlaid with something else. Pine, a faint, unmistakable scent of redwood. We kept walking, our confusion mounting. Where were the buildings? Where were the streets? Where were the houses? We should have hit a residential area by now, or at least a main road, but there was nothing, just the fog, the damp earth, and the growing scent of pine. Chloe stopped, her grip on my hand tightening until my knuckles went white. "Julian," she whispered, her voice laced with pure terror, where's everything?" I looked around, my heart sinking into a bottomless pit. She was right. There was nothing. No houses, no shops, no cars, no lampposts. The fog was still there, but now it felt like it was filling a void. The ground under our feet felt like forest floor, damp and soft. We walked for what felt like an eternity, calling out, our voices swallowed by the dense white. We spun around, desperate, trying to find any sign of the town. But it was gone, completely, as if it had never existed. We stood in what should have been the middle of a bustling street, surrounded by Victorian architecture, and there was nothing but the silent, swirling fog, the soft, damp earth, and the faint, lingering scent of saltwater and pine. The air was colder now, a deep, pervasive chill that seeped into our bones. I looked at Chloe, her face a mask of utter disbelief and terror. Her eyes were wide, glistening with unshed tears. Her lips were parted slightly, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She looked so vulnerable, so utterly lost. My eyes, despite the horror, still found themselves drawn to the curve of her jaw, the way her hair framed her face, the way her chest rose and fell with her frantic breathing. It was a bizarre, almost shameful instinct, to still be so acutely aware of her physical presence. Her beauty, even as the world around us had ceased to exist. "It's gone," she whispered, the words barely audible. "Eureka, it's gone." I couldn't speak. I couldn't form a single coherent thought. My mind was reeling, trying to process the impossible. The town, our town, the place we lived, worked, existed, it was simply not there. We stood there, hand in hand, in the silent, empty white, the fog swirling around us like a hungry spirit. The only sound was the distant, mournful wail of a foghorn, echoing from somewhere far, far away, a sound that now felt utterly alien, a lament for something lost. Then, at the very edge of my vision, through a momentary thinning of the fog, I saw him standing perfectly still, perhaps 100 yards away, barely a shadow in the swirling white. The man, the tweed jacket, the gaunt face. That he was just standing there, watching us. And on his face, that thin, stretched smile. It seemed wider now, more knowing, more satisfied. He didn't move. He didn't approach. He just stood there, a silent, unmoving sentinel in the void. And as the fog closed in again, swallowing him whole, I realized that he hadn't been watching us. That he had been watching the town. And now he was watching its absence. That we were alone. Utterly, completely alone, in a place that shouldn't exist, where a vibrant, bustling town once stood. Just the two of us, the fog, the smell of saltwater and pine, and the terrifying, crushing silence. The cold was absolute, and the dread was a living thing growing inside me, a silent scream that would never escape. It was still there, a constant, gnawing presence, even as I felt Chloe's hand tighten in mine, her fingers digging into my palm, a desperate, shared anchor in an impossible, vanished world. We were still here. But Eureka wasn't, and the man, he knew. He always knew.